Film theories are a good way that both fans and critics can analyze a certain film. There are a dense amount of film theories available in order to analyze various films, but for me, one of the most interesting is the auteur theory. The auteur theory views the director of a film as a major creative force, which I agree with. However, there are some things with the auteur theory that I disagree with. For example, I don't agree with the statement that there aren't good or bad movies, but only good and bad directors. Despite disagreeing with this particular statement, I do find it very interesting, and I find the auteur theory an interesting theory as a whole. This is the biggest reason for why I chose the auteur theory as my film focus area to analyze both Infernal Affairs and The Departed. Before analyzing the author theory, however, it is important to talk about the socio-cultural context of both these films. Since the date for making those films are very close apart from each other, and because they're both relatively recent films, it is not relevant to talk about the date these films were made in. However, something that is very relevant to talk about is the culture they were made in, since one was made in China and the other in the USA. As many of us know, China contains the biggest population in the world, and because of that, it is a very different country from the USA. To make sure that the general population of China all have something to eat, the things there are very cheap compared to the USA. Also, China doesn't have a strong emphasis on selling entertainment, but rather exporting products to other countries, as well as selling cheap things inside their country. We all know that most products we know of are made in China, which is the biggest reason for why China is the second largest economy in the world. However, because China doesn't have a strong focus on selling entertainment, filmmaking is not very popular there, and it's not often that a film made in China becomes relevant around the world. The USA, on the other hand, has the biggest filmmaking industry on earth, and most of the popular films of the world knows come from there. Now, you ask me why is this relevant? I answer, since the USA has the biggest film industry on the planet, film producers also allow the directors a higher budget. The same happens with China, but in reverse, since the film producers have a lower budget for the Chinese film industry. This will come to play later on in the study. Now to the part that we are all waiting for, analyzing both of these films according to the author theory. The point of doing this is to see if we can answer the question. Based on Infernal Affairs and The Departed, and analyzing the author theory, which of these directors is more creative? Let's start with Infernal Affairs since The Departed came later. Infernal Affairs has something quite uncommon. It has two directors, Andrew Law and Alan Mack. Communication is key in filmmaking, and these directors have to be able to synergize the vision of the film in a way that satisfies them both, which is easier said than done. It could work though, and a good example of it working is the Russo brothers directing the Marvel franchise together, and an explosion of creativity involved. However, if these two directors can't communicate clearly, this could limit the creativity of a film and could force them to not take risks. I think for Infernal Affairs specifically, having two directors wasn't so great, since you can clearly see in the filmmaking that they were playing it safe. First of all, most of the shots in this film are static, which means that they are on tripod. It's much easier to do than a handheld shot, for example. To me, this does suggest that they were playing it safe, since there's nothing wrong with shooting a movie in a tripod. It just limits the filmmaker into making beautiful handheld shots or even dolly shots. Another thing I noticed in Infernal Affairs is that filmmaker rules are strictly followed. For example, let's look at this great Infernal Affairs scenes where the mob members are joking about who is a cop and who isn't. As you can see, these look like normal shots, where the 180-degree rule is strictly followed and over the shoulder shots are used very often. Despite being a great scene because of the acting and dialogue, in the filmmaking aspect, there's not a distinct style that makes you think this was made by any specific director. And even though I quite enjoyed Infernal Affairs, there's not a distinct style that makes me know this film was made by both Andrew Law and Alan Mack, even if I knew all their work. Not having a distinct style is far from the case with The Departed. And if you know Martin Scorsese's work, you immediately know this film was made by him. Such aspects as the frequent use of camera movement, dolly shots, the use of voiceover at the start, the use of violence, and even lightning makes you know this is a Scorsese film. Despite this scene having no relevance to the main plot, I think it's a really good scene and worth including in this film. The reason for that is the use of red lighting to represent the evil in Frank Costello, as well as the mise-en-scène to follow up on that. The low angle being in the center of the frame and being the eye-catching figure of the shots all highlight his superiority. This is perfect and highlights his character exceptionally. This is right after Billy and the audience discovers that Frank is protected by the FBI, which further highlights his superiority aspect. My point with all of this is when you first watch The Departed and you know Scorsese's work, you almost likely know Scorsese made The Departed. Going back to my setup question of, based on Infernal Affairs and The Departed, and analyzing the author theory, which of these directors is more creative? And because of Scorsese's distinct style, you would assume the answer to this question is obvious. However, it's a little more complicated than Scorsese is more creative. As I said before, the Chinese film industry is not very popular, and because of that, the budget for Chinese films is way lower. Because the budget of the Chinese is way lower, the directors don't have as much freedom for creativity as Americans do. In exact terms, to produce the whole Infernal Affairs film, they had a budget of $6.4 million. And comparing that with The Departed, which had $90 million, the difference is drastic, and it would not be fair with Andrew Law and Alan Mack to just say that Scorsese is the more creative director. As I said before, I don't fully agree with the author theory, and it wouldn't be fair to judge Andrew Law and Alan Mack as not being creative enough since they were not in the same playing field as Scorsese to begin with. What I could say is that Scorsese is a very good director and deserves the popularity he has, and that Infernal Affairs was a good movie and made me want to see more of Andrew Law and Alan Mack as directors.